Senator Drazkowski, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, the A211 amendment creates policy that provides for non-allowance of the barbaric practice of partial birth abortions in the state of Minnesota. We have seen in this bill, Mr. President, that the extreme Democrats, with their extreme policies around this issue, have ripped up the guardrails of protection for Minnesota's babies, mothers, and girls. And this is not where Minnesotans are at. We have in federal law a protection. In 2003, the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act of 2003 was passed, Mr. President, and then subsequently interpreted properly and upheld by a court in 2007 by the U.S. Supreme Court. And it's been the law of the land and the federal level since. This extreme bill will allow the barbaric practice of partial birth abortions to wreak havoc upon the lanes and freeways and homes and schools and everywhere in the state of Minnesota. So this amendment is designed to make certain that we provide these protections so this barbaric practice cannot happen in our great state. Mr. President, I would offer an amendment to the amendment. It is the A213 amendment.
Senator Drazkowski offers an amendment to the amendment, which is identified as the A213 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment to the amendment.
Senator Drazkowski moves to amend the A211 amendment to House File Number 1 as follows. Page 1, delete line 4, and insert. This is the A213 amendment.
To your amendment, to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. The A213 amendment provides more substance and definition so that the amendment is fully articulated. And you can see some of the descriptions there of that barbaric process. One, I think that Minnesotans and Americans should not be proud of, should be ashamed that we've had this type of practice happen in our state and country. Members, I handed out earlier a handout of a diagram that shows the partial birth abortion process. This was developed by an abortionist from Ohio, and it shows you graphically how at least one type of partial birth abortion happens. And so that is there for you to see and understand. These are abortions that happen in the second and third trimester all the way up to the point of birth. And this amendment protects Minnesota babies and mothers and girls from this barbaric practice. I encourage you to support the amendment. Mr. President, encourage members to support the amendment. I stand for questions and look forward to the conversation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Point of order.
Point of order. For what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. And as I read the amendment to the amendment under subdivision 3, the amendment to the amendment creates criminal penalties. I direct your attention to Rule 35.2, describing a non-germane amendment. A non-germane amendment relates to a substantially different subject or is intended to accomplish a substantially different purpose than that of the original bill, which is proposed clearly. this does not seek to accomplish the same ends as the underlying PRO Act, which is to codify existing Minnesota state law. And furthermore, it creates criminal penalties, which is not something contemplated or even within the same chapter of law as the bill before us. So I ask you to rule this non-germane. Thank you.
Advice, Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to correct Senator Klein. It does, in fact, say that violation of subdivision 2 shall not be subject to criminal penalties, and therefore is germane under Senator Klein's argument.
Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had the same comments. It expressly, in this new policy that is created in this amendment, this would be new policy for the state of Minnesota, explicit policy. It says that crimes are not created and it is not a violation for the pregnant woman that's outlined in that particular subdivision.
Senator Klein.
Advice, correction accepted. Nevertheless, this is a matter before the Judiciary Committee to decide the nature of these penalties for this forbidden practice. And again, it is substantially different from the underlying bill before us. So thank you.
Mr. President, advice.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, just a few minutes ago, we had an amendment to my amendment that not only was substantially different, it changed the whole thing. It was so different that, in fact, it made it the exact opposite of what I was seeking to do. And so the extreme Democrat pro-abortion bill that I was seeking to provide some protections was redirected and substantially changed. And so earlier it was already a custom and usage then of this body for an amendment to an amendment to substantially change. And if indeed that is the motion by Senator Klein, by the fact of custom and usage, you absolutely, for intellectual honesty and consistency of this body, need to rule his motion not well taken.
Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I think it's very clear. There is not any criminal penalties invoked by this language. The reading is very clear. I will read it to the members. A pregnant woman who sought or obtained an abortion that violated subdivision 2 shall not be subject to criminal penalties for violating subdivision 2. It's language that says we are not creating any criminal penalties in the law with this amendment. So I don't understand why we have a point of order in front of us, Mr. President. It's clear as a day. I thank you and hope you find the point of order not well taken.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. While I agree that the lines 20 and 21 say the pregnant woman shall not be subject to criminal penalties, the language says it is prohibited for any individual to knowingly perform a partial birth, abortion, etc. So, Mr. President, clearly a crime is created for those providers who participate in providing that essential health care service, Mr. President. So, and if, Mr. President, if we want to talk about things that would send this bill to Finance Committee, I think Senator Latz would agree if we're creating new crimes, there will be an effect and an impact on our criminal justice system. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, further advice?
Hold on. Senator Latz. Oh, I thought you were making a motion. Senator Lucero, then back to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Further advice. Having been a member of the Public Safety Committee in the other body for 8 years, I can tell you, and I'm sure in your time in this legislature, you are well aware that there are many prohibitions throughout Minnesota statute that don't cite any criminal penalty. So it is a very extreme stretch for what we just heard Senator Dibble attempt to articulate. Furthermore, it was earlier this very week that I even asked the clarifying question, do we follow the rules of this body? And in fact, the majority leader said yes, and then we proceeded to a vote on a motion to refer Senate File 1 to the Finance Committee, and that was voted down. And so it now appears to be the custom and usage of this body to not send bills to the Finance Committee. But nevertheless, that custom and usage standard having been established earlier this week, notwithstanding the language offered in the Drazkowski amendment to the amendment, doesn't have any criminal penalties stated. And therefore, there is no fiscal cost that could be seen. And there is no reason that it would have to go to a Finance Committee.
Senator
So for
Klein.
that reason, I again urge you to rule the point of order not well taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Klein?
Thank you, Mr. President. I withdraw my point of order.
Point of order withdrawn. I want to make sure that no one else wants to speak because once... Huh? I want to make sure that I see him.
I request a roll call.
Okay, roll call has been requested and roll call granted. I will come back to Senator Drazkowski as the last person. So the person, now I'm going to Senator Grudenhagen and then Senator Drazkowski.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I rise in support of Senator Drazkowski partial birth abortion bill. Not only is it grotesque, and I know we've had denials that these types of things will happen, but yet we've seen video of Planned Parenthood taking dismembered parts of babies and selling them on the open market. That's barbaric, ladies and gentlemen. By adding this, even if you think it doesn't happen, then why not add this? Just for a little bit of protection. You know, we've voted down or had dismissed, viable weeks protection because we keep an open door to complete exploitation of women and children, unborn children. So members, let's put this in place at least to keep baby parts from being sold on the open market once they're torn apart from the mother's womb. Members, think carefully about this. Planned Parenthood does not have to be the big payoff of this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Morrison and then Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to ground us in reality again that we should not put medical terminology that does not exist into statute. Partial birth abortion is a created term that does not happen in practice.
Senator Drazkowski. On your amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I have another handout that I handed out earlier about this. It says medical terminology for categorizing induced terminations of pregnancy. On top, you'll see a part that I highlighted with ink midway down. Talks about the dilation and evacuation procedure, also known as DNX, which is the term that the abortionists use, and in some cases even the medical people use, who can also be the abortionists at times. That language in that handout, members, comes, I'll read it to you. It says, intact dilation and evacuation, DNX, is one type of D&E procedure. DNX procedures should be included in the D&E category. DNX procedures are sometimes called, and then it's bolded, partial birth abortions. Members, this is a terminology and billing table that is found on the Minnesota Department of Health website. Our Minnesota Department of Health recognizes the term partial birth abortions, and I wish that Minnesota extreme Democrats that are bringing forward this language.
Point of order.
Senator, something that's been brought to my attention earlier, and I still try to give folks a little latitude, is name calling of colleagues is not appropriate. You can call the bill extreme, that's fine. Just like I would not allow Democrats to, personalize it by party as opposed to a bill that's being presented. So I just ask that you refrain from using that language. You can call the bill extreme, that's fine, but we will not put the word Democrat there because that would be inappropriate. So I'm going to just say that to all of us, no matter which side of the aisle that we're on, we are still colleagues, and we can not like a bill, and we cannot agree with it. You can call the bill extreme, you can call it whatever you want, but we will not personalize it with parties. So with that gentle reminder, Senator Drazkowski.
With all gentleness, Mr. President. Thank you. Mr. President, this is a barbaric procedure that we're talking about here today. I've got a summary in front of me that I created as I made some notes from the description that the Ohio abortionists put in a publication, the same one who put the diagram together that I shared. When a baby is big enough to survive outside the womb, it becomes impossible to do a dilation and evacuation abortion. A D&E is where you rip apart the baby with sharp grabbers while she is still in the womb and suck it out through a tube in pieces. In a partial birth abortion or a dilation and extraction, the abortionist grabs the feet and starts pulling to deliver the baby breech and pulls the legs out and delivers everything but the head. The abortionist then stabs the baby in the back of the head with a scissors and uses a suction catheter to suck out the baby's brains. Mr. President, while only seconds earlier she was healthy and struggling to be delivered, to draw her first breath and begin crying, the baby is now delivered dead. Members, that's the barbaric practice of partial birth abortion. We need to eliminate this from our state and conform to federal law so that the women and babies and girls in the future in the state of Minnesota can have the protection that this extreme bill aims to tear out. Thank you, Mr. President.